Welcome in, everybody. My name is Trent Marlow, joined alongside Keegan Hamblett, and we are talking today about the U.S. World Cup roster for the upcoming World Cup in 2026. Now, there are some schools of thoughts about what the U.S. men's World Cup roster should look like. Some people believe that there should be no Major League Soccer players at all. Others believe that Major League Soccer players should be included in the U.S. roster. This is kind of divided among the U.S. fan base, and it's a large topic of conversation right now. I personally believe that there should not be any MLS players in the World Cup roster, but I know Keegan disagrees, and he's going to tell you why right now.
Yeah, so it's a very vague term just to have MLS players because you could say Lionel Messi for crying out loud. He's at Inter Miami. So why do we get to say that he shouldn't be on Argentina for the World Cup? And also, too, it's interesting because the World Cup next year is going to be held in the US and Canada, where MLS is the major league as well. I do want to go over some examples of some US national team players that seem to have worked out when they were in MLS prior or are currently there now. I feel like the big one for me is Matt Turner when he was in MLS and that Gold Cup run in 2021 and then onto World Cup qualifying through the fall of 2021 into the spring. Fans clamored for him to be the number one goalkeeper while he was still in MLS and before he made that move to Arsenal during the summer. Walker Zimmerman, big fixture on the U.S. national team. I know he did get some hate for drawing that penalty against Wales in the World Cup, but they still bring him in all the time. Jesus Ferreira, he's another big one too. He's the fastest player ever to 10 goals for the U.S. national team ever. He's the only player I believe to have back-to-back hat tricks as well. Now, I know U.S. legend Taylor Twellman is known for kind of bashing on him, saying he didn't really play much competition, whether it was St. Kitts and Nevis, teams like that around CONCACAF. But I would pose the question, would he receive that kind of hate if he was anywhere else in the world? And I talked about Messi too. And I know people say MLS, oh, it's a retirement league. That's where players go to retire. Older guys just want to get more playing time. Do you make the case, though, for Tim Ream, U.S. national team legend, now is in MLS? And MLS, too, we talk about the guys just wanting to play. MLS allows these players to get more opportunities and playing time. You can start, I don't know if you have to go the full 90, but if you go 75, 80 minutes, you're getting the reps out there. And I don't know if you would get that, say, in other leagues around the world.
Yeah, all right, Keegan, you make some great points there, but I'm still going to stand firm on my case that European players should be on the World Cup roster, not Major League Soccer players. And it goes for a few reasons. Major League Soccer in itself is the top domestic league in the U.S., but it can't really be compared to the European leagues when it comes to talent. You look at the English Premier League, the Bundesliga in both Austria and Germany, Ligue 1 in France, La Liga in Spain, and there's so many more. Serie A in Italy also comes to mind, and those are all teams that they have. They pay the players more than MLS. They have the top talent in the world. The best American players play on teams within clubs in those leagues. Christian Pulisic plays in Serie A. Weston McKennie plays in Serie A. Tyler Adams plays in the Premier League. Matt Turner, who you mentioned, is now on English, kind of an English club. I know he's having a rough time over there across the pond, but he's been struggling with all of that. So that's something that we need to kind of take into account of what is the level that MLS is at. And to do that, firstly, I kind of look at MLS. So in MLS itself, there are 332 players that are American. So those are 332 players that can play for the U.S. national team, that play in MLS. That's a lot of players. Obviously, not all those players could even go to the World Cup. This is the highest nationality in MLS. It makes sense. It's the U.S. domestic league. But 332 when Canada is second with only 44 players. And Canada is not exactly a top-notch soccer country. So what that kind of shows me is that MLS is extremely America-focused, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that's great for development. But I don't know if that means that that's really the best U.S. players then, because then who else are they competing against besides other Americans? I don't know if that really drives the competition to compare, I don't know, when you're going to go up against a Spain or an Italy in the World Cup and you've only ever played American players before because you played in MLS, that could really be a detriment to you. In addition, MLS, it's not as competitive as even, I'd argue, Liga MX, which is the Mexican league. And Liga MX they're decent. I'd say they're just slightly ahead of MLS right now. But when you look at MLS has never had a team finish in the top 4, not even just 1, 2, top 4 of the Club World Cup ever. Liga MX has done it. There have been teams from Middle East that have done it. Countries that aren't necessarily known for their soccer talent and ability. I think that that's another thing that really comes into play. The ability that the MLS has shown when they go to compete against, foreign leagues like that. They've always kind of failed when they go up against Liga MX or in the Club World Cup. They've never beaten anybody, major. They don't beat, those teams from Europe that come and play in that competition. I know some people say that competition is a joke, but that's another story. Next up, MLS doesn't really hold some of the best talent that the U.S. men's national team can field. In fact, I've compiled a quick list here, Keegan, of some U.S. players that don't play in MLS. Okay, so just real quick: Brendan Aronson, Paxton Aronson, Tyler Adams, Florian Below, George Bello, Taylor Booth, John Brooks, Gianluca Busio, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Cade Cowell, Sergio Dest, Daryl DK, Matthew Hoppe, Ethan Horvath, Weston McKinney, Mark McKenzie, Yunus Musa, Kevin Padres, Jordan Pefok, Ricardo Pepe, Christian Pulisic, Chris Richards, Giovanni Rea, Joe Scally, Josh Sargent, Malik Tillman, John Tolkien now has just moved over to the Bundesliga, as well as James Sands. So you see some of MLS's best talent moving over to Europe. That's what John Tolkien and Sands have done recently. So, I just gave you a list of who I think are all great players and who could all fit into the national team for this World Cup roster. And I've left about half the guys off those lists. There's still Tim Weah, Haji Wright, Matt Turner, a bunch of guys who are just absolute ballers. And I think if they were to go in MLS, they would be superstars the same way Messi is right now. One other point I have is that now there's so much talent in Europe that it's almost silly, in my opinion, to call up MLS players. When you have a guy that's playing in the Champions League, that's the best competition in the world. It's the closest thing to the World Cup. Yet you're going to call up some guy that plays in MLS instead. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Another thing I did was I looked at our most recent World Cup roster. So obviously new coach, Poch is in, Greg Berhalter is gone, but our most recent World Cup roster. And out of it, we have a bunch of players that played in the all 4 games that we played. It's 19 players in total that made an appearance off the World Cup roster in a World Cup game for the U.S. the last World Cup. 5 of those players currently play in MLS, which means that the 14 remaining players played in Europe or abroad somewhere else. And at the time of the tournament, only 4 of those players were on current U.S. teams. Tim Ream has since gone back to MLS from the Premier League, obviously, from England. And he was one of the players that played. But at the time, he was not an MLS player when he played in the World Cup for the U.S. So that's kind of like the gist of why I think the MLS players maybe don't deserve to be there. I don't think MLS has good enough competition, enough diversity within, the amount of the diversity of players that they have, the amount of talent that is in the league itself. I still think it's a great developmental league, but I believe that it's apparent that the U.S. men's national team can easily make a full non-U.S. or non-MLS roster, I should say, non-MLS roster that can compete at a high level, especially when you have players that are playing in the highest leagues in the world for the best teams in the world for big time money. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Keegan. I'm going to kick it back to you real quick.
Yeah, I'll go real quick, Trent. This Gold Cup coming up during the summer, it's going to be key because we talked about Matt Turner. Miles Robinson, another big one. He kind of got the starting nod in the back during qualifying. This summer is going to tell a lot about who they're going to call up for next year.